Boy sends Selfie to his grandma, she zooms in and starts crying. Ethan Carter stood in the middle of his dorm room, surrounded by half-unpacked boxes and the unmistakable smell of fresh paint and new beginnings. Sunlight streamed through the window, casting long rectangles of light across the standard-issue blue carpet. Outside, the shouts and laughter of other freshmen moving in created a soundtrack of excitement that matched the rapid beating of his heart. "I made it," he whispered to himself, running a hand through his disheveled brown hair. The words felt strange on his tongue, almost unreal. After everything, after the accident, after the grief, after the years of wondering if he'd ever feel normal again, here he was. Ethan Carter, college freshman, about to start his life. He glanced around at his side of the room. His roommate hadn't arrived yet, giving him first pick of the beds. He'd chosen the one closest to the window, where morning light would force him awake for his early classes. Grandma Martha had always said he could sleep through a tornado if allowed. The thought of his grandmother made him reach for his phone. Martha Carter had been more than a grandmother to Ethan. When his parents' car slid off an icy bridge 8 years ago, changing his life forever at age 10, it was Martha who had stepped in without hesitation. She had moved from her small retirement community into their family home, determined that Ethan wouldn't lose his childhood bedroom along with everything else. "You need roots to grow," she had told him the night after the funeral, when he'd asked if he would have to move away. "And I'm not about to uproot you when you need stability the most." It was Martha who had sat with him through the nightmares, Martha who had learned to cook his favorite meals when he wouldn't eat for days, Martha who had somehow understood when to push him to rejoin life and when to let him grieve. And it was Martha who had worked extra hours at the library well past retirement age to start a college fund for him, insisting his parents would have wanted him to have every opportunity. Ethan straightened his navy blue bedspread, arranging his pillows neatly against the wall. He'd promised himself he wouldn't cry today, not on this first day of real independence. But the lump in his throat grew as he thought about Martha driving home alone to an empty house, after spending the morning helping him move in. "She's probably worried sick," he muttered, picking up a framed photo of himself and Martha at his high school graduation and placing it carefully on his desk. At 72, Martha Carter was remarkably tech-savvy for her generation. She had insisted on learning to text and use social media to keep tabs on him. But she was still a grandmother, prone to worrying until she heard he was safe. He arranged his desk methodically, laptop centered, notebooks stacked by subject, pens in their holder. The small silver locket caught his eye as he placed it next to the framed photo. He'd found it 2 weeks ago in a clearance bin at Timeless Treasures, the local thrift store where he'd been hunting for affordable dorm decor. The antique silver oval, about the size of a small egg, had immediately appealed to him. Though tarnished and scratched in places, it had an elegance to it, with delicate scrollwork etched into its surface. "Probably some old costume jewelry," the cashier had commented when he brought it to the register along with a desk lamp and some vintage band posters. $1.50 for that one. Ethan had liked the way it looked, classic, with history. Something about the weight of it in his palm made him feel connected to the past. He'd polished it up when he got home, but never bothered to pry it open, assuming the hinge was stuck or broken. Now it sat on his desk, catching the afternoon light, a small touch of elegance among the utilitarian dorm furniture. His phone buzzed with a text from Martha. "All settled in? Need anything from the store?" Ethan smiled. She had only left campus 3 hours ago, after helping him unload the car and meeting his resident advisor. Yet here she was, already planning another trip if he needed it. That was Martha, always ready to drive the 40 minutes back if he'd forgotten toothpaste or needed another extension cord. "All good, Grandma," he typed back. "Rooms coming together." He paused, then added, "Missing you already?" Because he knew it would make her happy, and because it was true. Despite his excitement for independence, the silence in the room felt strange after years of Martha's classical music playing softly in the background at home. Impulsively, he switched to the camera on his phone, angled it to capture himself against the backdrop of his newly arranged desk, and smiled. The photo caught him mid-nervous laugh, his eyes bright with anticipation. In the background, his desk displayed the organized chaos of his new life. Textbooks stacked and ready for classes, the framed photo of him and Martha, and the silver locket gleaming in the corner. First dorm selfie. He typed beneath the image and hit send. He set his phone down and returned to unpacking, pulling out clothes and filling drawers while mentally reviewing his schedule for orientation week. There would be a floor meeting tonight, followed by some kind of freshman mixer. Tomorrow, a campus tour and meetings with academic advisors. Then class registration, student ID photos, bookstore runs. The thought was both thrilling and overwhelming. His phone buzzed again, but this time it wasn't a text. Martha was calling. Ethan frowned slightly. She usually texted unless something was urgent. He picked up on the second ring. "Hey, Grandma, everything okay?" There was silence on the other end, then a sound he couldn't quite identify. Something between a gasp and a sob. "Grandma?" Alarm shot through him. "Are you alright?" "Ethan." Her voice sounded strange, choked. That locket on your desk. Where did you get it?" Ethan turned to look at the small silver oval, confusion creasing his brow. "The locket? I bought it at that thrift store on Main Street a couple weeks ago." "Why? What's wrong?" Another silence, longer this time. When Martha spoke again, her voice trembled. "I need you to open it and tell me if there's anything engraved inside." "Open it?" Ethan picked up the locket, turning it over in his palm. "I don't think it opens, Grandma. I tried when I bought it, but the hinge seems stuck." "Try again," Martha insisted, her voice urgent. "Please." Bewildered, Ethan examined the locket more carefully. He ran his thumbnail along the seam and applied gentle pressure. To his surprise, there was a small click, and the oval separated into two halves. Inside, where a photograph might once have been placed, was nothing but empty space. But on the inner surface of the back half, tiny letters caught the light. "There is something," he said slowly. "It says, M&M, Forever 1963. The sound that came through the phone was unmistakable this time. Martha was crying. "Grandma? What's going on? Why are you crying?" "That locket," Martha said, her voice breaking. "That locket belonged to me, Ethan. Your grandfather gave it to me on our anniversary. It was stolen from our home 35 years ago." Ethan stared at the small silver oval in his palm, the weight of it suddenly different. Heavier. Significant. A chill ran down his spine as he looked at the initials that now made perfect sense, Martha and Michael. "But how?" he began. "I don't know," Martha said, her voice steadying slightly. "But that's my locket. I would recognize it anywhere." There was a pause, and when she spoke again, there was a note of wonder in her voice. "After all these years, how did it find its way back to us?" Ethan looked around his dorm room, at all the symbols of his new beginning, and then back at the small silver locket that had somehow traveled from his grandmother's jewelry box to a thrift store clearance bin to his college dorm room. What were the odds? The coincidence seemed impossible, yet the proof sat in his palm, catching the afternoon light. "I don't know, Grandma," he said softly. "But I'm going to find out." Martha Carter set her phone down on the coffee table, her hands trembling so badly she nearly dropped it. The living room of her modest ranch-style home suddenly felt too quiet, too empty. She stared at the frozen image of her grandson on the screen, the familiar face she loved so dearly now blurred through her tears. But it wasn't Ethan's smile that had caused her world to tilt on its axis. It was the small silver object sitting innocuously on his desk, catching the afternoon light through his dorm room window. A locket she'd given up hope of ever seeing again. "Michael," she whispered to the empty room, as if her husband might somehow hear her across the decades that separated them. "It's come back to us." Martha reached for the ball of yarn beside her half-finished knitting project, needing something solid to ground her. The blue wool felt rough against her fingertips as memories cascaded through her mind like dominoes falling one after another. Michael had given her the locket on their 10th anniversary in 1963. They'd been so young then, barely in their 30s, with their whole lives ahead of them. Michael had saved for months to buy it, working overtime at the factory. Something silver for 10 years, he'd explained, fastening it around her neck with calloused fingers. And something to keep me close to your heart. Those had been happy days, before the cancer took him just 5 years later. Martha had worn the locket every day after his funeral, keeping his small black and white photograph inside. When their home was robbed in 1990, the locket was among the items stolen. The police had never recovered any of the stolen property. The insurance money had replaced the television and stereo, but nothing could replace that small silver oval with its precious cargo of memories. Until now. Martha's hands shook as she zoomed in on the photo again, making sure her eyes weren't playing tricks on her. But there was no mistake. The distinctive scrollwork on the surface, the slight dent near the hinge where she'd accidentally dropped it once, it was her locket, as surely as she was sitting here. But how? How had it traveled from a burglar's hands to a thrift store to her grandson's desk? And why now, after all these years? Martha stood up abruptly, dropping her knitting needles. She needed to see it, to hold it in her hands again. Part of her wanted to get in her car immediately and drive back to campus, but she knew that was foolish. She wasn't as steady behind the wheel as she used to be, especially not in this emotional state. She walked to the hallway mirror, studying her reflection. The woman who stared back at her had changed so much from the young wife who had first worn that locket. Her hair had silvered, her face had lined, her shoulders had rounded slightly with age. But the eyes that looked back at her held the same spark, the same determination that had gotten her through losing Michael, losing her son and daughter-in-law, and raising their boy alone. "Pull yourself together, Martha," she told her reflection firmly. "You've waited 35 years. You can wait one more day." She returned to the living room and picked up her phone again, her fingers still trembling as she called Ethan back. She needed to hear his voice, to make sure this wasn't some elaborate dream her lonely mind had conjured. "Grandma?" Ethan answered on the first ring, concern evident in his voice. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine, dear," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Just surprised. That locket, it means more to me than you can imagine. You said Grandpa gave it to you?" "Yes." Martha sank back into her armchair, clutching the phone tightly. "For our 10th anniversary. I thought it was gone forever when our house was robbed, back when your father was still in high school. The robbery you never talk about," Ethan asked softly. Martha nodded, though he couldn't see her. "It changed me, that break-in. I never felt safe in my own home again. Your grandfather had been gone for years by then, and suddenly these strangers had invaded the space where I still felt his presence. They took his watch, my mother's pearl earrings, and that locket." Her voice caught. "But the locket hurt the most. I kept a picture of him inside it." "The picture's not there anymore," Ethan said gently. "I'm sorry, Grandma. I wouldn't expect it to be, after all this time." Martha wiped away a tear with the back of her hand. "But the locket itself. Ethan, it's like getting a piece of him back. A piece I thought was lost forever." There was silence on the line for a moment before Ethan spoke again. "I'm going to find out how it ended up at that thrift store." "Oh, honey, that's not necessary." "It is," he interrupted, with a determination that reminded her so much of his grandfather. "This isn't just coincidence, Grandma. This means something. And I'm going to find out what." Martha felt something stir within her chest, something she hadn't felt in a very long time. Hope, perhaps. Or the sense that some things in this world might still make sense, even when they seemed impossible. "All right," she said softly. "But be careful, Ethan. Sometimes the past is better left alone." But even as she said the words, Martha knew neither of them believed them. The locket had returned for a reason. And whatever that reason was, they would face it together, just as they had faced everything else life had thrown their way. 3 days into college life, and Ethan had barely unpacked. His textbooks remained stacked in their original pile, his campus map unfolded but unstudied. The silver locket had consumed his thoughts since that phone call with his grandmother. He sat cross-legged on his bed, turning the locket over and over in his hands. His roommate Jason, a lanky computer science major from Seattle, glanced over curiously. "Dude, you've been staring at that thing for hours. What's the deal?" Ethan hesitated. The story felt private somehow, a thread connecting only him and Martha. But the weight of the mystery was becoming too much to bear alone. "It belonged to my grandmother," he said finally. "It was stolen from her house 35 years ago, and somehow I found it at a thrift store 2 weeks ago." Jason's eyes widened. "No way. That's some Twilight Zone level coincidence." "Exactly," Ethan replied, clicking the locket open again to reveal the engraving. "What are the odds that out of all the thrift stores in all the towns in all the world, this locket would end up in the one where I live, just as I'm about to leave for college?" His phone buzzed with an incoming call from Martha. Ethan had been updating her daily, though he had little to report. "Hey, Grandma," he answered, moving to the window for better reception. "Ethan, dear." Martha's voice sounded stronger today, the initial shock giving way to a quiet determination that matched his own. "I've been thinking about the locket all night. There's something I didn't tell you." Ethan's pulse quickened. "What is it?" "The locket doesn't just open the way you found," she said. "There's a secret compartment. Your grandfather was always fascinated by things with hidden mechanisms." "A secret compartment?" Ethan examined the locket more carefully, turning it in the light from his desk lamp. "Press the tiny indentation on the right side while holding down the clasp," Martha instructed. Ethan did as she said. To his amazement, a small section of the locket's interior slid aside, revealing a minuscule compartment no larger than his fingernail. "Is there anything inside?" Martha asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan peered into the tiny space. "There's something." Using the tip of his pencil, he carefully extracted a tightly folded piece of paper, yellowed with age. "It's a note or something." With trembling fingers, he unfolded the paper, revealing cramped handwriting in faded blue ink. "If found, this belongs to M. Carter, 1424 Oakwood Lane," Ethan read aloud, his voice catching. "Grandma, did you write this?" "No," Martha replied, her voice thick with emotion. "Michael did. He was always worried I might lose it, so he put that note inside without telling me. That was your grandfather, always thinking ahead." The reality of what he was holding hit Ethan like a physical force. This wasn't just an antique that had accidentally found its way back to his family. This was a message across time, his grandfather's handwriting preserved in this tiny capsule for decades. "But if this note was inside all along," Ethan reasoned aloud, "why wouldn't whoever stole it try to return it? Or at least pawn it somewhere other than a thrift store? Maybe they never found the secret compartment," Martha suggested. "Or maybe what? Maybe someone did find it, and that's exactly why it ended up where you could find it." The thought hung between them, impossible yet somehow the only explanation that made any sense. "Grandma, I need to know everything about the robbery," Ethan said firmly. "Every detail you can remember." Martha sighed heavily. "It was April 15th, 1990. Tax day. I remember because I just mailed our returns that morning. I came home from the grocery store to find the back door forced open. They took the usual things, the television, the stereo, your grandfather's coin collection, and my jewelry box from the bedroom. Was anything else significant in that jewelry box? Not valuable, no. Just sentimental pieces. Your grandfather's wedding ring. The pearl earrings my mother wore on her wedding day. And the locket, of course. Were there ever any suspects?" Ethan pressed. "The police mentioned a string of similar break-ins in the area. They suspected it might be connected to a man named Carl Reeves who lived a few blocks away. He had a record for similar crimes, but they could never prove it was him. He moved away not long after." Ethan grabbed a notepad, scribbling down the name. "Carl Reeves," he repeated. "And the thrift store where I bought the locket, Timeless Treasures, it's been there for years, right?" "At least 20 years, I think," Martha confirmed. "Ethan, what are you planning?" "I'm going to visit that store again," he replied, already reaching for his jacket. The locket didn't appear there by accident, Grandma. Someone knew what they were doing. Please be careful, Martha cautioned. Some mysteries are better left unsolved. Not this one, Ethan said firmly. This one found us for a reason. As he ended the call, Ethan felt a surge of purpose unlike anything he'd experienced before. College orientation classes, his carefully planned future, all of it could wait. Right now, his past was calling to him through a small silver locket, and he needed to answer. I'm borrowing your car, he told Jason, grabbing his keys. I've got a thrift store to visit. Timeless treasures looked different in the fading afternoon light. What had seemed charming and quaint during Ethan's previous visit now felt mysterious, even slightly ominous. The cluttered shop windows reflected the setting sun, casting long shadows across the dusty display of antiques and second-hand items. The bell above the door jangled as Ethan entered, the sound sharp in the quiet store. Behind the counter, an elderly man with wire-rimmed glasses looked up from his crossword puzzle. Help you find something? He asked, his voice gravelly from years of cigarettes. Ethan approached the counter, the locket heavy in his pocket. I bought this here a couple weeks ago, he said, placing it carefully on the glass countertop. I'm trying to trace where it came from. The shopkeeper adjusted his glasses, peering down at the silver oval. Don't usually keep records of specific items unless they're high-value consignments. This was probably part of a lot. A lot? Bulk purchase. When estates get cleared out, or storage units get auctioned off. We buy boxes sight unseen sometimes. Ethan leaned forward, his heart racing. Can you check? It's really important. This locket was stolen from my grandmother's house 35 years ago. Something flickered in the old man's eyes, interest, or perhaps wariness. That's so? He shuffled toward an ancient computer in the corner. Let me see what I got in the system. The keyboard clacked loudly as the shopkeeper's gnarled fingers pecked at the keys. Silver locket, oval, came in about a month ago. He squinted at the screen. Part of a mixed lot from Summit Storage Auctions. Unit belonged to someone who stopped paying. Deceased, maybe, or just moved on. Do you have a name? Ethan pressed. The shopkeeper hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. Technically, I'm not supposed to share customer information. He paused. But seeing as this might be stolen property. Unit belonged to C. Reeves. Abandoned 3 years ago. Ethan felt a jolt of electricity run through him. C. Reeves. Carl Reeves. The same name Martha had mentioned. Do you have any contact information? An address? The shopkeeper shook his head. Just the storage company info. He scribbled an address on a slip of paper. Summit Storage, over on Industrial Parkway. Ask for Darlene. Tell her Stanley sent you. Ethan thanked him and hurried back to the borrowed car, his mind racing. The pieces were falling into place too perfectly to be coincidence. Whoever had robbed his grandmother's house had kept the locket all these years, eventually storing it away until they could no longer pay for the unit. Summit Storage was a sprawling complex of identical metal buildings, numbered in fading paint. The office was a small prefabricated structure at the entrance, with a flickering, open, sign in the window. Inside, a middle-aged woman with a vibrant red dye job looked up from her computer. Her nameplate read, Darlene Mathers, manager. Stanley from Timeless Treasures sent me. Ethan began, deciding to skip the formalities. I'm trying to trace a previous tenant, C. Reeves. His unit was auctioned off a few months ago. Darlene's eyebrows rose. You police? No, just trying to return something that belonged to my family. Darlene studied him for a long moment, then sighed. Carl Reeves. Nasty piece of work. Had Unit C-17 for nearly 20 years. Paid like clockwork until 3 years ago when the payments suddenly stopped. We tried contacting him, but mail came back undeliverable. Do you know what happened to him? Died in prison from what I heard. No next of kin came forward to claim his stuff, so after the legally required waiting period, we auctioned it off. She tilted her head. What was it of yours he had? Ethan showed her the locket, explaining its significance. Something softened in Darlene's expression. My mother had a brooch stolen years back. Never did get it back. She turned to her computer. I shouldn't do this, but... She printed a sheet and handed it to him. That's the last contact information we had for Reeves. And this, she wrote another address on a sticky note, is where he lived before prison. Old apartment building in Riverside. Still standing, far as I know. The afternoon was fading into evening as Ethan drove to the Riverside district, a once industrial area now partially gentrified with coffee shops nestled between weathered brick buildings. The address led him to a shabby apartment complex that had resisted the neighborhood's renewal. The building manager, a tired-looking man named Rodriguez, shook his head when Ethan mentioned Reeves. Before my time. But old Mrs. Figueroa and 3B been here forever. She might remember. Mrs. Figueroa, a tiny woman with cloudy eyes and a sharp memory, remembered Carl Reeves all too well. Bad man, she said firmly, inviting Ethan into her cluttered apartment. Always coming and going at strange hours. Sometimes with boxes. Nice things, you know? Things a man like him shouldn't have. Was he a thief? Ethan asked directly. Mrs. Figueroa nodded vigorously. Everyone knew. Police came many times. But they never found nothing in his apartment. She leaned closer, her voice dropping. Because he had a hiding place. In the basement. I saw him once, carrying a jewelry box down there in the middle of the night. Ethan's pulse quickened. The basement? Is it still accessible? Locked up years ago after a flood. But there's a window around back. Big enough maybe for someone skinny. She gave him a meaningful look. As darkness fell, Ethan found himself crouched by a grimy basement window, questioning all his life choices. Breaking and entering had never been on his college preparation checklist. Just a quick look, he murmured, working the rusted window latch with a screwdriver borrowed from Mrs. Figueroa. For Grandma. The window groaned open, releasing the musty smell of long-abandoned spaces. Ethan shined his phone flashlight into the darkness, revealing a basement cluttered with broken furniture and water-damaged boxes. And there, in the far corner, barely visible beneath years of dust and cobwebs, was a small metal strongbox, waiting for someone to uncover its secrets and continue the trail that had already led Ethan much deeper into the past than he'd ever expected to go. The strongbox was heavier than it looked. Ethan struggled to lift it from its dusty corner, cobwebs clinging to his sleeves as he maneuvered through the narrow basement window. His heart pounded against his ribs, partly from exertion, partly from the surreal feeling that he was holding tangible evidence of a decades-old crime that had wounded his family. Back in his dorm room, with Jason watching wide-eyed, Ethan placed the box on his desk. The lock was rusted but intact. Dude, you literally broke into a condemned basement for that? Jason asked, eyeing the filthy metal container. What if it's just full of, like, old magazines or something? Ethan shook his head. It won't be. His certainty surprised even himself. Something had been guiding him through this strange journey, some invisible thread pulling him forward. He couldn't explain it, but he trusted it. The lock resisted his initial attempts before surrendering with a grudging crack. Ethan lifted the lid, releasing the musty scent of sealed paper and forgotten secrets. Inside lay a stack of yellowed newspaper clippings, a small leather-bound notebook, and beneath them, a plastic freezer bag containing several pieces of jewelry. Ethan's breath caught in his throat as he carefully removed the bag. Inside was a gold wedding band, a pair of pearl earrings, and several other items he didn't recognize. That's my grandfather's wedding ring, he whispered, touching the bag reverently. And those are my great-grandmother's pearl earrings. Jason let out a low whistle. Holy shit, you actually found stolen property from 35 years ago? That's some next-level detective work. But Ethan was already reaching for his phone, his fingers trembling as he dialed Martha's number. Grandma, he said when she answered, his voice thick with emotion. I found them. Grandpa's ring, your mother's earrings. They were hidden in a basement where the thief used to live. There was silence on the other end, then a soft inhale that sounded like Martha was trying to steady herself. "How?" she finally managed. "It's a long story," Ethan replied. "But the important thing is, they're coming back to you. Just like the locket did." "Oh, Ethan." Her voice broke. "I never thought, after all these years." While Martha collected herself, Ethan turned his attention to the notebook. The handwriting inside was jagged and slanting, the entries dated sporadically across the 1980s and 90s. "I think this is Carl Reeves' journal," he told Martha, flipping through the pages. "There are entries about different houses he broke into, items he took." He paused, his finger landing on a familiar address. "Grandma, here it is, April 15th, 1990. Our house." "What does it say?" Martha asked, her voice barely audible. Ethan read aloud. "Easy job. Empty house. Good haul. Silver and electronics. Old lady's jewelry box had some decent pieces, gold ring, pearls, silver locket. Could fence the metal, but something about the locket. Kept it. Bad luck maybe." "Bad luck," Martha repeated slowly. "He thought the locket brought him bad luck." Ethan continued scanning the entries that followed. "Looks like things went downhill for him after he took your locket. Lost his fence, police picked him up on another job, did some time." He flipped forward several pages. "Then this entry from 2008, found the note in the locket today. M. Carter, Oakwood Lane. Thought about returning it. Too late now. They just arrest me. Going back inside tomorrow, 3-year stretch. If I don't make it out this time, maybe someone else will get it back to her. Karma owes me that much." The room fell silent as the weight of those words settled over them. Carl Reeves had discovered the note, had known who the locket belonged to, had even considered returning it. But fear and circumstance had prevented him. "He died in prison 3 years ago," Ethan said softly. "His storage unit got auctioned off, and eventually, the locket found its way to me. All these years," Martha's voice quavered, "all these years I've been angry at the faceless person who violated our home, who took the last pieces of Michael I had. And now," Ethan prompted gently when she didn't continue. "And now I find out he was just a man. A man who made terrible choices, yes. But a man who kept that locket all those years, who felt its weight on his conscience." Martha took a deep breath. "A man who, in his own way, tried to make it right in the end." Ethan looked down at the stolen treasures spread before him. Physical objects weighted with emotional significance far beyond their material value. "What do you want me to do with everything, Grandma?" "Bring them home," Martha said simply. "It's time for them to come home." The next morning, Ethan stood outside the local police station, the strongbox under his arm. He'd removed the family items but left the journal and newspaper clippings. The desk sergeant looked bewildered as Ethan explained the situation. "You're turning in evidence from a 35-year-old burglary case that's already closed because the perpetrator is deceased?" The officer clarified, raising an eyebrow. "Yes," Ethan replied firmly. "There might be information about other victims in there, other stolen items that could be returned." The officer shook his head but took the box. "I'll pass it along to the detectives. Don't hold your breath, though. Cold cases aren't exactly a priority." "That's okay," Ethan said, feeling a weight lift from his shoulders. "The important things already found their way home." As he walked back to his car, Ethan felt strangely connected to the man whose criminal actions had set this whole journey in motion. Carl Reeves had taken something precious, something irreplaceable, not just objects, but Martha's sense of security and connection to her late husband. Yet somehow, across decades and beyond death, a kind of restitution had occurred. In his pocket, the locket felt warm against his fingertips, as if alive with its own story, a story that wasn't finished yet. 2 weeks later, Ethan sat at Martha's kitchen table, watching autumn leaves scatter across the backyard. The familiar scent of apple pie filled the house. Martha had been baking since dawn, her way of celebrating his weekend visit home. His first month of college had passed in a blur of lectures and assignments, but thoughts of the locket, and its journey were never far from his mind. The recovered jewelry pieces sat in a small wooden box at the center of the table, each item restored to its former luster through Martha's patient polishing. His grandfather's wedding band gleamed in the afternoon light. The pearl earrings had been carefully cleaned and mounted in a shadow box on the wall, alongside a faded wedding photo of Martha's parents. But it was the locket that drew Ethan's attention. Martha had insisted he keep it. "I've been thinking about it all wrong," she had told him when he tried to return it along with the other recovered items. "All these years, I've been seeing that robbery as something that took Michael away from me a second time. But now I realize maybe it was his way of staying connected to us, to you." Ethan turned the locket over in his hands, feeling its familiar weight. "What do you mean?" Martha smiled, the sunlight catching the silver in her hair. "Think about it. Of all the thrift stores in all the towns, that locket ended up in yours. Of all the people who might have bought it, you picked it up. You, who never showed any interest in antique jewelry before." She reached across the table and clasped his hand in hers. "And then, without knowing what it was, you placed it on your desk and sent me a photo at exactly the right angle for me to recognize it. If that's not your grandfather's doing, I don't know what is." Ethan had always considered himself practical, not given to superstition or magical thinking. But the chain of coincidences that had brought the locket back to their family seemed to defy rational explanation. "So what now?" he asked, clicking the locket open to reveal the empty space where his grandfather's photo had once rested. Martha rose from her chair and disappeared into her bedroom, returning with a small envelope. From it, she withdrew a carefully trimmed photograph. "I've been saving this for the right moment," she said, sliding it across the table. "It's the last photo taken of your grandfather, your father, and you together." Ethan picked up the small square. In it, his grandfather, a tall man with kind eyes and Ethan's same cleft chin, held a toddler-aged Ethan on his lap. Beside them stood Ethan's father, barely 30 then, smiling broadly. 3 generations of Carter men, linked by blood and love and now by a small silver locket that had traveled an impossible journey to bring them back together. "I thought maybe you'd want to carry them with you," Martha suggested softly. With trembling fingers, Ethan carefully positioned the photo inside the locket. It fit perfectly, as if the space had been waiting all these years for this exact moment. When he clicked it shut, something felt different, a weight, not of burden but of connection. Martha stood and moved behind him, her hands surprisingly steady as she fastened the chain around his neck. The locket rested against his sternum, cool at first, then warming to his skin. "This locket came back for a reason," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "You were meant to carry it now." Ethan reached up to touch the silver oval, feeling the subtle ridges of its engraving under his fingertips. "I'll take good care of it." "I know you will." Martha returned to her seat, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "But more importantly, I want you to understand what it means." "What does it mean?" "It means that nothing truly important is ever really lost." She gestured to the recovered jewelry, to the photos on the walls, to the home that had sheltered 3 generations of their family. "People leave us. Things get taken. Time passes. But the connections, those invisible threads that bind us to the people we love, to our past, to who we are, those remain." Ethan nodded, understanding washing over him in a warm wave. He had begun this journey thinking he was solving a mystery, reclaiming stolen property. He hadn't expected to find himself tethered to a legacy he never fully understood. His grandfather, who had died before Ethan could form lasting memories of him. His father, taken too soon in a tragic accident. The gaps in Ethan's life had always felt like missing pieces, empty spaces he couldn't fill. But now, with the locket against his heart and his grandmother's wisdom in his ears, those gaps began to feel different, not absences but connections, invisible but enduring. "I wish I'd known them better," he said quietly. "You know them through me," Martha replied. "Through the stories I tell, the values they instilled, the love they left behind." She reached out to touch the locket resting against his chest. "And now through this." Outside, the autumn wind picked up, sending leaves dancing across the yard in swirls of red and gold. Inside, Ethan Carter sat with his grandmother, both of them suspended in a moment where past and present converged, where what was lost had somehow, against all odds, been found. The locket rested against his heart, a small silver token carrying the weight of memory, legacy, and love. Its journey had ended where it began, with a Carter. But the story it contained would continue as long as Ethan carried it, a new chain of memory connecting all that had been to all that would be.